My name is Paul Putney, and grew up in Philadelphia, but in the summertime, starting in about 1931, my family and I, my brother and sister and mother, and I would come up and stay in this place right here. This was kind of a shack. It was called Bowen Cottage, and we rented it for $200 for the season. I, at that time, was about 5 years old. It didn't look like it does now. It had a piazza around it and totally unfinished inside. No heat, cold water, an old oil stove, and we more or less lived on the beach. We paid $200 for the season for this, $5 for a rowboat. We'd go out and catch fish and sell them to some of the tourists around here. There was an old garage in the back there that we used to play in, but it's entirely different now. That pond over there, we used to call it Lord's Pond, and we'd pick water lilies out of that pond and sell them to the tourists here. And it was beautiful. You could walk along down to Fortune's Rocks and all the way up to Biddeford Pool along this beach. And it was a wonderful place to live. For the summer, that is. But we'd come up along about June and then go back in September, back to school. And we really didn't have to spend an awful lot of money. We'd go clamming to get clams and sell some of those. I worked on a lobster boat up here for a guy named Captain Norton for a summer or two. And it was really a nice way of life here. It hasn't changed that much other than these houses are all remodeled and rebuilt, certainly rebuilt. Family next door here, Freddie Radcliffe. He was about my age. We used to play and get into mischief together. And over there was a family named Godfrey.
Talking to the camera.
There was a family named Godfrey that lived over there. We always looked at them as being very rich. They had cars and things.
How would you get up here?
Well, my father would drive us up in our old 1929 Ford. He'd dump us off here, then he'd go back to Philadelphia, then come back at the end of the summer to pick us up and take us back to Philadelphia. And that trip took about 2 days. We had my mother had a sister in the Boston area, and she and her 2 kids used to come up with us and spend the summer. Those 2 kids, Peggy and Dick, are both dead now, as is old Aunt Margaret. But it was a fun time. It was really very lovely. We take the boat out through the surf and go fishing. One day my sister almost drowned out there. But the view hasn't changed at all. Just all the houses have changed. I understand that this house, the old Bowen Cottage, which is kind of a shack, I think a couple of years ago I checked and it was selling for about $400,000. I think we probably could have bought it for about $1,000 in those days. Shame we didn't. Now this is a view of the back of Bowen Cottage. That's new. That's not the old cottage, but it's on the same footprint. There was a piazza along that, and then there was an old garage right here that was falling down at that time. Where when we'd get up here, my father would fix the old Model A Ford with a screwdriver and a pair of pliers. This is brand new. That garage. And this is the pond where we used to go out, and sometimes we'd catch fish. These, they called them hornpout. They were trout. They were pets of a guy named Lord who had a wharf there. And then we would sometimes catch the trout and go out to that little island right there and build a little fire and fry the trout in a little pan. Over there, we'd go in and pick blueberries. There were loads of blueberries around here. We'd pick those, and we'd also sell those to make a little money to keep ourselves going in the summertime. There were no houses back there then, and these are all new. All the housing has changed, but apparently still on the same foundations, or what they call footprints.
What about the O'Neills?
Oh, the O'Neills, their house was down that way, a few houses. They're apparently all gone, and that house has been rebuilt as well. Okay, now here we're standing on the southeast side of Biddeford Pool. It's about mid-tide. Now, the village of Biddeford Pool is all the way up at that end of the pool. And this is the bottom of the pool. This used to be just, this used to be quite like it is now, I suppose, but there were no houses. There was no houses here, no house there. There was an old shack up there that was called Quinney's Clam Shack. The Quinneys were a family that dug clams here in Biddeford Pool until they disallowed clamming back in the 30s because it was polluted and they were getting clams all over the place. And they would sell them, and the mother, Mrs. Quinney, would shuck the clams and throw the clam shells out the window of the little shack that they had. And they had chickens that would run around and eat all the clams and the clam shells, and they would sell the chickens, and the chickens tasted just like clams. Now there's a little cove right around there where we used to go swimming. We used to call it Kitty Cove because it had a little stream that came into it, and it was sort of shaped like a cat's ass, and they said that's why they called it Kitty Cove. We used to dive off the rocks over there. Across the road here was Farrier's shop, sort of an antique shop, the house with a purple door. I think it still stands there. I think they're probably all dead now.
What about the water tower? Is it here?
Well, the water tower was here. There's the water tower. And we used to go and climb up on that. You could climb up it, and we'd go all the way up to the top. And one 4th of July, we were throwing firecrackers off the top of it when the police came and raised hell with us. They were going to start a forest fire. But we used to walk to the water tower and pick blueberries all around in that area. And I guess they still get the water out of the water tower.
And you used to clam on the...
Oh yeah, we used to go out and clam here until they declared it illegal. And that would have been in the mid-30s that they did that. But I understand they're now clamming again. It wasn't a good place to clam because it was so muddy. It was just all good mud. And we used to then go down to Goose Rocks Beach and down that way where the clams grew in sand, which was nice. But Biddeford Pool up there, they had the lighthouse and the harbor up there. That was very nice. I guess we're going to go up and look at that now. And over there, they called that Camp Ellis.
Yep, it's still there.
Is that still there? I don't know why they call it Camp Ellis. Now we're at what we used to call the Gut. We're at Biddeford Pool, the village of Biddeford Pool. And this is the pool in here. And the current through here is tremendous because that whole pool fills up at high tide and empties all the way out at low tide. And this is a dock that used to be here. We used to go fishing off here. It was difficult to swim because if you dove in, you'd be out there within 2 minutes. But the yacht club, which is right over there, this building isn't here. The yacht club, they used to have they'd make money on it, I guess. They used to have a clam bake where they'd start a fire in the morning, and then they'd put in bags with a lobster and clams and an ear of corn and put it in and let it steam under seaweed for a couple of hours. And then those things, they'd sell them, I think they'd sell each bag for about 50 cents. And you'd sit around and
when would they do that?
That would have have been back in the 30s, the late 30s.
No, but didn't they do it on 4th of July or something?
Oh yeah, no, it'd be a 4th of July, as I recall. 4th of July, maybe Labor Day as well.
And each person would get their own bag.
You get your own bag, right, and you have a bag and slop butter all over yourself. It was just a pretty big mess. But over here, right in from here, that was where Goldthwaite's store is there now, but it used to be across the street there. And next to it was a bowling alley that was very high. It was poked out over that way. And for one summer, I worked for a lobsterman. This area here was a lot of little shacks where the lobstermen would fix their traps and so forth, and the lobster boats would go out from here. And my job was to find Cap Norton at 2 o'clock in the morning, because he was going to get him on the boat, and then we'd go out and pick up the traps and come back about 7, 8 o'clock and sell the lobsters to Goldthwaite's for 25 cents a pound. And then they would resell them for 50 cents a pound, I guess. And then Cap Norton would disappear until the next day when I come by. It was the same way when they come by and pick him up and take him off to go lobstering. This now is Goldthwaite's store, but as I recall, Goldthwaite's store was right over there, and they had the lobster pound there, and that's where Cap Norton and I would bring up the lobsters and sell them over to Goldthwaite's. And on the other side of that, a long building that went out there, was the bowling alley. And they used to use candle pins and small balls, and a few nights I set up pins in that bowling alley over there, which is very difficult to do. Now I think the bowling alley came right about in here and extended out. It was on pilings, and that was where Cap Norton would sleep oftentimes, down under the bowling alley. And his little shack was down here. It got pretty chilly in the wintertime for sure. But I don't recall. This was a Goldthwaite store, I'm sure of that. I forget where the post office was, but it wasn't there. It was a bowling alley there. Now this is the old church that Aunt Margaret used to make us go to every Sunday. We'd have to go in the water to wash ourselves up. That is, go in the ocean, wash ourselves up, put on shorts. The only time we ever wore shoes in the summertime was to put on shoes to come up to this church. It was a congregational church then. And then we'd go in and sing hymns and so forth. None of the kids wanted to come, but we had to come. And then after that, we would go over to watch the exercises at the lifeguard station, where the lifeguard would, or the Coast Guard station, where the Coast Guard would put on a display of how they rescued people from ships at sea. It was all very exciting because you could ride in the breeches buoy and so forth. But that was the Sunday morning. That's what we would do, and then we'd go back home and have clams and lobsters for lunch. But it wasn't too bad. It's just that I never did like going to church. This is the old Coast Guard station, which is now a home. It used to be an official Coast Guard station. There were about 12 to 15 sailors in here, plus an officer. And there was, and they were charged with saving people's lives from ships that would go out here and founder and get up on the rocks. They had long boats that were in these garages, and they could pull the boat down here and go out and rescue people. And every Sunday they had a drill, because many of the ships in the old days were sailing ships, and in order to rescue them they would fire a cannon that would take a line through the rigging of the ship, and then they would attach a breeches buoy and pull people from the ship onto the shore. And every Sunday morning they had an exercise back here around this side, and that was a pole with a yard arm on it, and they'd shoot the cannon from the other side, send the line across the yard arm, and then if people wanted to take a ride on the Beach's buoy, they could do that. And it was very exciting. All the young sailors were very nice, the Coast Guardsmen. And of course, when the war came on, World War II, this was all a secret installation and so forth. And they were also charged with manning that lighthouse. Where is the lighthouse? The lighthouse
on the other side.
is off here.
It's around
And they stopped all those exercises, and I guess those kids went off and did their Coast Guard work around the rest of the world. But it was kind of an exciting Saturday morning that they would do that, and they'd let us go in through the Coast Guard station and up on the tower where they would watch. I don't know when it became a private home, probably 20 years ago or so. Speaking of the Coast Guard, I guess it would have been about 1940, after the war, 1941 maybe, after the war had started. My cousin Dick, who was 10 years older than I was, Dick and I put a mast on the O'Neill's boat and rigged a sail and came out through the gut. And as we were coming out near the lighthouse out there, the boat tipped over. We were in a gale. We tipped over in the boat, and we both had to swim into the lighthouse. And we got there, and it was manned by the Coast Guard. And we went up to the window and up to the door of the lighthouse and knocked on the door. And here was this sailor who was fairly embarrassed, who was in there with his girlfriend. He had to call the station here, and they sent a boat out to pick us up. And the officer on the boat was really pissed off at us for getting out there in the first place and for causing them to get out there to have come out and rescue us. And I think that poor sailor, I don't know whether he was disciplined or not, because they found out he had his girlfriend out there, and I don't think that went too well for him. Now we've come south from Biddeford Pool down along the Route 9, and this is Fortune's Rocks here. And this went from Bowen Cottage on down onto these rocks. And there used to be a bathhouse in here where people would come down on weekends.
Say that again.
There used to be a bathhouse here, just a place where you could change your clothes. And a lot of the factory people from Biddeford and Saco, they were Quebecois that came down to work in the textile mills. And they would come down on weekends and they would go off on these rocks and pick up the snails and periwinkles from there. And they'd have a fire on the beach where they would cook these things in the fire. And we kids would all go around and make fun of them eating snails, because we used to step on them out here. And we used to make fun of the Frenchmen eating these snails, and they were very good. Now I live in France, and I pay a lot of money to eat those snails. But anyway, we used to walk around on these rocks. My mother used to love to walk on the rocks, and I'd go with her, and we'd poke around on the rocks. And we'd go down, there was a little store down the other side of the, it's gone now, called Tar Boxes, where you could buy a soda or something like that. And this was it's only about quarter of a mile, half a mile from Bowen Cottage, so this was very, very nice there. It still is. It's a beautiful beach. Because in those days, I always thought those rocks were a lot bigger than they are now. I guess that's because I was a kid.
Yeah, well, at low tide, there's a bigger, they go out farther.
Yeah. Yeah, after the war started, in September 39, the following year in 40 and then in 41, the United States got involved in sending Lend-Lease supplies over to England and to the Soviet Union. And German submarines would lie off the coast here and torpedo those ships as they came by up toward Nova Scotia. And oftentimes there would be wreckage from these ships come in. One time, my mother and I found a whole big can of cashew nuts that came in off a ship, and an officer's cap, a Navy officer's cap, and sometimes you find pieces of life raft. It was really terrible because the millions of tons of shipping were knocked out here by the Germans. Now, when the United States entered the war, they would patrol out here and try to stop that. But it was a very dangerous run for some of the merchant seamen who had to go through. Now we're on Ice House Road. That's the road that comes in through here. And there actually was an ice house here. This pond in the wintertime would freeze over, and they'd come in and saw chunks of ice out of the pond, and then haul it over to a building over here, which is made of wood, and the ice would be stored in sawdust from sawmills around here. They would take the sawdust and store the ice in the sawdust. So in the summertime, they cut the ice into pieces, and you could either come and pick it up for your ice box, or there was a guy that used to deliver the ice every couple of days in a truck along the beach there, and you would buy it for something like a nickel a block of ice like this. This was in the 30s, before they had home refrigerators. They didn't invent the home refrigerator until the 30s, and people couldn't afford them until the early 40s. So everybody had an ice box, and this is where they got their ice, out of the pond. It would freeze in the winter, and then it would be kept in sawdust in the summer, and it was a very good insulation. And then by the end of the summer, it would get cold again, and you didn't need ice. Now we're on Hoyt's Neck, which is south of Fortune's Rocks, and this area right here has this road going out there. At high tide, this was underwater. At low tide, it wouldn't be that deep. Who was maybe the late 30s. I think he died, and they were going to do a wet, and they were selling all of his things, and we came down here, and my mother bought a metal bed that we put back up into the Bowen cottage. But it's a beautiful big home. I guess it's gone now. And they're still there. I ran into somebody down here who remembered the Livingston people who had that place up there. I think probably the place was done away with by the 60s. But it was quite a beautiful big home, a huge estate there. These houses were not here. It was just an isolated, beautiful home. And over here, of course, you have the Granite Point Beach. Now this ends our tour of the beautiful Fortune's Rocks, Biddeford Pool, Granite Point area, and I hope you enjoyed our little visit as much as I have, and I'll take questions at your convenience. Thank you very much for joining us on our little